On today's video, we are going to build Commodore 64 cartridges with printed cartridge shells and plain PCBs. We are also going to restore a rather unusual Commodore 64 ALDI and repair a TL866 EPROM programmer. To make this possible, we're gonna need some parts from the sponsor of this video, PCB Way. In here, I've got some printed cartridges and PCBs. So up until now, I have been using plain PCBs as my Commodore 64 cards, and that has worked quite well for me. But then I found this project online. So I grabbed the Gerbers and had PCB Way print a couple of these, and then I ordered some extra PCBs. So these are Versa 64 carts by BWAC, Rev 1.6 apparently. My old card is 1.5, not sure what the difference is here. But it's probably something minor, because this card has worked really well for me for many years. Okay, so first impression, the PCBs look as awesome as they always do. I've come to expect it from PCB Way. Actually, now I noticed a tiny difference here. A difference that obviously doesn't matter, but these two pads here, they are connected together. And on my old card, it's just one large pad. But otherwise, I can't really see any difference. So these look to be pretty much identical, and the size is almost identical to the DesTest Max switch. So hopefully we can install one of these in one of these housings too. So how about these housings? Yeah, they look awesome. They have a textured surface, making them look sort of like original carts. And they are designed to be accessible with a door on top here. So I think the idea here is that you can open up this door. That will allow you to mess around with the jumpers and the switches inside. So that's pretty clever. This project also has 3 different sizes of push buttons. And the reason for different sizes is because you can use different push buttons depending on what size of reset switch you have installed on your card. As you can see, these are completely different sizes. And these are made to match the size you have on your card. That's pretty awesome, attention to details. Actually, I found the difference between version 1.5 and 1.6. So in version 1.6, he added notches for the stumpy cart. Not sure exactly what that means, but these must be the notches. And apparently, this is not a stumpy cart, because these notches are not needed for this housing. Building one of these is really simple. So first we need to install 4 10K resistors. So the Versa 64 cart is a generic EPROM cartridge for the Commodore 64. And it can be configured for 8K, 16K, 8K Ultimax and 16K Ultimax cartridge. And EPROM can also be set with dip switches. So it offers manual bank switching. So you can use it for multiple ROMs on just one EPROM. But what it can't do is to do bank switching with software, so it's not suitable for some games. Actually, I noticed another difference here. The Rev 1.5 also has some pads for an optional switch here. And next we need a couple of diodes. And these are 1N4148. Very standard diode. Everything is clearly marked in the silk screen. So we may actually get away without even reading the instructions. Oh, I just noticed something here. This area here is marked optional 16K only. I haven't checked yet, but I think we're going to use this cart with an 8K ROM. So we can actually have skipped these components. And apparently my OCD wouldn't allow me to keep this resistor in. So we're gonna have to turn it around and resolder it. Yeah, now I feel much better. And next up we have the only cap on this PCB, and it's 1 microfarad ceramic cap. And next up we have the reset switch. And apparently this was the only size I had in my stash. But luckily we've got different sizes of push buttons we can install on top. So we can just choose the right size for the push button I have. And the last component to go in is a 28-pin socket. You could of course solder the chip directly on the PCB. But I checked and there is enough clearance in the cart for an EPROM in a socket. Actually, there are even instructions at the back here how to set this card for different ROMs. Okay, and we're actually done, because we only need to install the jumpers and the switches if we want to use this card with multiple ROMs on the same EPROM. But I'm going to use this cart with one ROM only. So instead of installing the switch block here, we can just short some of these pads here to set the card. Same thing with these jumpers here. The through holes are designed in a way so you could either use them with pin headers and jumpers, or just bridge the pads you want to set. And I actually found these notes here together with my card, and it looks like the EPROM I have installed here already has all the usual ROMs installed. So we can be really lazy and just use the image I have on this EPROM, and then use that same bin file for several different cards that I need. And by setting the jumpers and the switches, we can set the PCB to use whatever ROM we want, because they will all be on the same EPROM. Now if you're on a budget, you could of course use one cart with all these ROMs, or any other ROMs you would like to have installed on the card. But I don't like to mess around with switches and jumpers. And building one of these is so cheap, it doesn't make any sense to me to mess around with the jumpers and the switches. Instead I can just have a few of these carts. Also, when you order PCBs you will probably get 5 boards anyways, so you might as well just use them. Okay, I noticed something else here. In the silk screen here we have 3 different settings here for 2764, 27128 or 27256. But my old cart actually has a 27C512, so apparently this works too. To copy that EPROM we're going to need the TL866. And you guessed it, of course it's broken. The stupid ZIF socket just gave up one day. So to finish a video that I was working on, I just installed a regular 40-pin socket. But now I have a new ZIF socket from AliExpress. So let's just go ahead and repair it. And to get inside we need to remove 4 screws underneath. Now it actually might be my fault that it got damaged, because I used this adapter here and it's using regular pin headers. So one possible explanation here for the broken ZIF socket is that these pins might actually be too thick. Now I'm not sure if that's the case, but I'm going to use this type of pin headers instead for adapters, because they have much thinner pins and should be more kind on the ZIF socket. Okay, let's take the lid off and take the PCB sandwich out. To disassemble the sandwich we need to desolder 1 pin on each side. And then the 2 PCBs are connected to each other with a whole bunch of pin headers. So I'm just gently going to pry it apart. So we got 3 rows of male pin headers on this PCB and corresponding female pin headers on the other PCB. Now we can access all the pads for the ZIF socket. And with the desoldering gun, this should be an easy job. Well, unless it's time to clean the desoldering gun, of course. I have this desoldering gun for quite a few years now, and it has worked really well, at least if I clean it regularly. Now let's see how bad it is this time. Yeah, it's completely clogged up, so no wonder it was giving me trouble. The benefit with this desoldering gun, compared to the other 2 popular options, is that it has the pump in the station, so the desoldering gun itself is really light and small. That is quite a pile of solder. What the heck did we do last week? This row of transistors are so close to the pads to the socket, so they actually got desoldered too. Well, that's an easy fix. And my cheap ZIF socket from AliExpress came in a bag without any protection of the pins underneath here. We're gonna have to unbend some of the pins here before we can install it. Well, that was easier said than done. The pins on this socket were so incredibly thick. They just barely fit the through holes. So I had to align all the pins perfectly to be able to install it. So if you are replacing the ZIF sockets on your TL866, check and make sure the pins are relatively thin before you order. Now I'm fully aware of that this socket is probably super crappy, but the proper 3M socket is super expensive, And I'm not sure it's worth it to repair one of these EPROM programmers with an original 3M socket. And I managed to mess this one up completely. So either this socket is absolutely totally useless, or I made a mistake. Or perhaps the through holes are just too small for this socket. So if we zoom in real close here, here's the socket with the lever down in its closed position. And if I open it up, the plates here should open up completely, but they don't. They're only going halfway. And if I try to push them out, they just bounce back. So either something went wrong here, or this socket is way worse than I thought. Now there are two screws here, so we could remove the lid. But the problem is, if we remove the lid, we would have to desolder every single pin here, turn the lid upside down, and then put all the pins in, and then put the lower piece back on. So we are definitely not going to remove this lid. But as it is now, it's completely unusable. So at the very least, we have to remove it. And I guess we'll check if I made a mistake. Actually, with the pins desoldered, if I now push on this plate, it almost stays in the open position. So maybe we only need to resolder it. Okay, so it seems I was to blame. So with all the pins desoldered, if I use the desoldering needle to wiggle the pin, they all end up in the open position. So apparently I was supposed to solder it with the lever up and the socket opened. Okay, all the pins soldered again. And all the pads on this side are now in its open position. Let's close it. And it behaves as it should. Now let's open it up again. And all the pads open up again. Awesome. So there you have it. Learning something new every day. Okay, let's insert an EPROM in the socket. We might as well reuse the ROM we have in my old cart. But I'm sure these are easy to find and download online. Okay, so this is a 27C512. We've got an ST branded chip. So let's choose it. Oh no, it's missing one of the pins. So maybe this socket is crappy after all. Let's try again. Well, it's complaining about the same pin every single time. Well, the solder joint looks normal. Let's add some solder and see if it helps. Okay, so it's this pin here. And the trace goes to this transistor here. And we've got a connection. So that's a bit strange. And with the probe in the ZIF socket, I've got a connection too. Okay, let's try again. Oh, now it failed all the pins. What the heck is going on here? Okay, I tried with a completely different chip here. Now I've got pin errors on 3 pins. Well, very long story short, I just kept getting pin detection errors. Sometimes on just one pin, and sometimes on all the pins. So I figured the ZIF socket must be crap. And I replaced it with a regular 40-pin socket. But then I got the same error again. So then I figured it was a bad EPROM. So then I tried with several different chips. But I just kept getting the same error over and over again. And only then I tried with some good old deoxit, and now the damn thing works. So there's probably nothing wrong with this ZIF socket. Now the chip legs look really good on all the chips I tried. But apparently some mild corrosion is a much more common issue than I previously thought. But to be on the safe side, I have made 3 copies of that EPROM now. Now I'm going to install the ZIF socket again. And in case it doesn't work, we have 3 good chips now. Okay, ZIF socket back on the programmer. So let's try to read. Here goes. And no, we still have some bad pins. Okay, so let's try with some deoxit. See if that helps. I guess I'll close and open it a few times. And if there is some oxidation on the pins or in the socket, it should come off now. Let's try again. Oh, now we only have 2 pins that are supposedly bad. Now it's only 1. Well, I might as well put a drop on the one that's giving us an error. And look at this. Now the damn thing works. So, sorry little ZIF socket from AliExpress for accusing you. And I guess another lesson learned today. Always use deoxit on crispy old EPROMs. Wow, that was a very lengthy repair. I probably skipped some of it in the video. Now I finally have working TL866 again. So we can continue. Well, just to finish this off, I removed the chip and put it back in and read it 10 times in a row. And it worked every time without giving me any trouble. So I definitely think we found the issue here. Crusty old pins on EPROMs. Or perhaps the socket, who knows. I'll let you guys know in a future video if it keeps working consistently, or if it gives me any more trouble. Okay, according to my cheat sheet here, the 8K ROM 0 is the diagnostic ROM. So we need to set J6 to ROM low. So we need to bridge these 2 pads here. And unfortunately it's fighting me. Maybe some flux will help. No, that gap is too wide to just bridge them with solder. I guess we could just add a lead on top of the solder. That would fix the issue. But let's make this neat. I made a small jumper from a piece of wire. We can install it here. And then I'll just solder it on the side of the PCB. Next we need to set J5 to switch. So we need to bridge these 2 pads. Then we've got switch 1 here. So game should be set to 0. That's these pads here. And I'm going to assume that 0 means not bridged. And the remaining 4 pads should be bridged. That's these guys here. So let's see if we can bridge these with just solder. Yeah, that seems to be working. Yeah, that totally worked. So the gap must be much smaller on these pads. So now we can add a freshly burnt EPROM. And wise from experience, I'm going to add some deoxit before we install that EPROM. I'll insert and remove the EPROM a couple of times. So if there is some mild corrosion on the pins, it should come off. With some help from deoxit magic. I checked that hole inside the cart. And it seems to be made for regular PC screws. So now we can install our new PCB and lock it down with a screw. Okay, so that's really sturdy actually. These are well designed housings. My reset switch is quite small, so I'm gonna go with the largest eject button. Now let's see if this all fits. I think it did. Yeah, I'd say printed parts have come a long way since I used the printer for the first time. Well, I guess about 10 years ago now. Because this cart looks really good. So how about that eject button? Yeah, it totally works. Awesome. But I just realized something here. There is nowhere to put a sticker because the surface here is textured. So if you put a sticker here, it will probably fall off quite quickly. Well, I'm not sure if it's possible, but a flat space here would have been ideal. Well, I guess I could put it on top of the cartridge. In the second cart, I'm gonna go with a 1541 diagnostics in ROM 5, because I think one of my drives needs a head alignment. And hopefully I can use that cart to do the job. And the only difference here is that I need to set the switch 1 differently. And by switch 1, I mean soldering these pads here. Now let's see if we can use this housing for the DesTest Max switch. Well, almost. There's something not quite right here. Oh, by the way, if you have watched my video building this cart, you know I made a mistake, so I had some trouble making it work. And that turned out to be a wrong cap. I mistakenly used the wrong value. I think it was this cap here. So that is now fixed, and this cart is working, and it's awesome. Well, I think it's these two pins here that are touching the shell here and preventing the PCB to sit flush inside the housing. So let's just mark where they are and then make a small cut in the housing here. Now let's try again. Well, with some minor adjustments, it does fit now. Okay, armed with 3 brand new Commodore 64 carts. Let's check out that weird and wonderful Commodore 64 ALDI. So I have actually been on the lookout for one of these for several years. And they do come up on eBay occasionally, but they are often very overpriced or in a really poor condition. So I held out until this one came up. This machine is in excellent condition, but the keyboard was really badly yellowed, so that's why it's out. But with just a quick retro bright, it now looks as good as the case. I guess we should put that keyboard back in the machine, and I'll talk some more about what this weird machine is. I like to retro bright my Commodore 64 keyboards with the keycaps installed, but I removed the PCB of course, and all the springs, because otherwise they will be damaged. So let's put that PCB back in, and all the tiny little screws. Most of my Commodore 64s don't have a working caps lock switch, because I keep forgetting to resolder these 2 wires after I have restored the keyboard. But apparently not this time, since I have removed all the springs. I'm gonna have to remove every single cap and install the spring and put the keycap back on again. Putting a Commodore 64 keyboard back together feels rather nostalgic, because when I started to make YouTube videos about 7 years ago now, I did Commodore 64s only. I've lost count of how many Commodore 64s I have restored, and apparently I was in a hurry, so I mixed in the slightly longer spring for the spacebar together with all the other springs. So I had to sort through all of them to find it. So I wonder how many restored Commodore 64 keyboards out there had that spring under the wrong keycap. So the Commodore 64 ALDI is a limited edition C64 sold in Aldi supermarkets in Germany for a limited period in summer of 1987. And it's basically a mix of a Breadbin 64 and a C64C. So you have probably already noticed that the keyboard is from a C64C. Now there are some clones on eBay, so the first thing to check if you're on the market for a C64 ALDI is that it has the early C64 keyboard with all the markings on the front of the keycap and not on top. And the case, as you have seen, is a regular Breadbin case. By the way to tell if a Commodore 64 Breadbin has been excessively used is by looking at the palm rest, because it quite quickly gets all glossy here and loses all its texture. I'm not sure how easy this is to see on camera, but the palm rest here should be all textured. And the next thing to check is the motherboard. And the true ALDI should have a 250469 Rev 3 board. And these boards are great. They have a much nicer image on the display than the older boards. So this ALDI is actually probably going to see some use. And I guess you could check all the dates on the chips and make sure they are from 1987 or older. That chip here actually looks a bit suspicious. So let's check some dates. Week 12, 87, 12, 87, 11, 87, 32, 86. So perhaps this chip has been replaced. And week 12, 87 here too. And the ROMs are week 14 and 11. CIA chips are from week 12, 87 too. So I think someone has replaced this guy here. I'll check my stash later and replace it. And these are of course PAL machines, since they were only sold in Germany. Well, aside from this dead bug here, this machine is pretty clean inside, so I'm not gonna bother cleaning it. And the last thing to check is the stickers underneath. For some strange reason, a true ALDI has 2 stickers with a serial number. I have no idea why. and they were all manufactured in California, which is also super weird, because they had a factory in Germany, and they were only sold in Germany, so not sure why they were all made in the US. But that means the serial number has to start with CA. So, if you're on the market for one of these, you know what to look for now. And next we have a minor fail, I'm afraid. So if we compare the cartridge to an original cartridge, it's actually a bit thicker. And unfortunately, that is a minor problem. Let me show you why. So if we insert the cart in a random Commodore 64 here, it fits perfectly, but it's a very snug fit. And on this Aldi machine here, the plastics has actually deformed slightly underneath the cartridge here. So I can force the cart in, but I have to use quite a lot of force, and it just barely goes in here. And I'm actually getting a small gap in the case here. So perhaps these carts should be redesigned and made just a couple of millimeters smaller and be the same size as an original cart. But a minor issue, and I was able to force it in. Well, I guess we need to test that cart and see if it works. And it does. I don't have the harness connected, so I'm not going to bother with a complete test here. I just want to see if the cart works. And obviously they do. And on that note, I'll end this video here. Before you leave, like, subscribe and leave a comment. And consider joining me on Patreon. And I'll see you guys again next week.